Let's do it.
So I was trying to think when the last time we did a pod together was, and it couldn't have been it couldn't have been the March like sell-off day, because I remember we did I think that was on Swann or something, but it was me and you and Brady and I can't remember who else, but then we must have done something after that, but it's not coming to mind right now.
I don't know. It's been a while, man. It's been a long time.
Well, incidentally, I just wanted to have you on for a catch up and see how's life going. But here we are on a fairly interesting day with lots to cover. So we'll have no shortage of things to discuss. Are you in a basement, or is that a background sort of thing?
No, I'm in a basement.
You're literally that's real world basement.
Yeah, those are my miners back there. And
nice.
This one right here, that's the embassy, and there's my umbrella.
Nice. Bull Bitcoin shirt, man. You got it all.
Yeah.
Decked out.
Yeah. I love this shirt, man. This is such a good shirt.
Yeah. Well, where shall we start?
Dude, you got me.
Thoughts, initial impressions
the banking system
on what's going on
again.
What else is new?
Yeah. It puts in context, like, it's funny, like when I was looking back, or back when I was looking forward at the current zone, and it appeared as if, we were coming off 0 interest rates and like 1% and stuff and starting to climb, and Powell was being aggressive, so to speak. 4% interest rates and such. Like I kind of saw like, or envisioned that we might go through like a small cycle. And that
what kind of
basically another debt cycle, that we could
kick the can down the road,
potentially move from 2020 to like 2024. And I saw our future as a series of larger, faster, and far more volatile credit cycles. And that following 2020, we go into like just extraordinary money printing, and then basically go into this facade of trying to tighten and trying to actually correct things. I will say that Jerome Powell has been a lot more hawkish than I thought. And there's been times where, because we're in this weird space where central banks are literally at war with each other right now over control over essentially market powers, like who's setting
that's a theory
now.
Though, right? Do you like, what's the rationale behind that?
Well, I'll say basically what I have pulled together and what I'm very interested in exploring right at this moment. Like, this has been like the last like 3 or 4 weeks that I've really kind of started to go down this direction a little bit, is that like LIBOR has had a lot of power over, it's a hugely manipulated market, right? Like there's, I think, what was oh God, I can't remember which bank it was, but we've already like basically had criminal charges and like massive fines for the fixing of LIBOR. And that what was happening, which is by the way, which was for anybody who is listening, is that interest rates, an interest rate setting mechanism in the European markets, in like UK banking and Bank of London. That I think it was the Bank of England that, I'm getting murdered with details here. I'm off on my specifics, but essentially the euro dollar market has had a lot of power and has been explicitly manipulating, and they are being punished, quote unquote, for manipulating the interest rates. That has had a massive effect on the domestic dollar market. Like essentially they've had a massive amount of control over the dollar market because they have been creating dollars in their system outside of the Fed's purview.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened in, was it January of 2022? So it's like a year and a couple of months ago, is SOFR, which is the onshore which is the Fed's attempt to begin setting interest rates to have a direct reference for the banking system here, became the standard. But there was still, and it took, I don't know, I think it was like 4 or 5 months or something for to have basically the volume to essentially be considered like a dominant interest rate setting mechanism. And then the CME has just announced in like the last week or something that they're killing euro futures altogether, euro dollar futures or whatever. So they're basically trying to push LIBOR entirely out of the market, so that the euro dollar market has no control over interest rates in the United States. And there is I think it was Doug or Tom. God bless, I can't remember his name. It sucks because I've been kind of like casually going back and forth between like the stuff that I'm reading on like the geopolitical order right now, which is like fascinating, and like the US Treasury markets, and then going back and forth to this. So I'm getting like kind of two different narratives. They're a little bit at odds with each other, but then like there are points where they overlap. And I'm trying to keep track of everybody's names that I've been listening to and stuff. So it's all up in the air. I didn't expect to like go into this immediately. But I listened to a thing just the other day. It was a Twitter Spaces. And it's a really solid argument that basically Christine Lagarde and Powell have essentially been kind of quietly, not quite so overtly, but they've been pretty substantially at odds with each other, with what they are trying to accomplish and what they're trying to do. And that Powell has not been very nice in that regard, in the context of what Christine Lagarde is hoping, the control that she is trying to exert in the European markets. And that essentially the WEF, the World Economic Forum players, and everybody who has basically already gotten on their knees for the World Economic Forum order, or their plan for the world, has been paying lip service to all of this, whereas this other idea is that essentially the New York bankers, the US like kind of Wall Street market, so to speak, is waking up to the fact that they have had an enormous amount of control over this, and the Federal Reserve is trying to exert its independence, so to speak. They are trying to take back the reins, but in doing so, they're sacrificing the credit markets. Like they're in their effort to attack the Eurodollar markets, they're also eviscerating the credit markets here, and the US Treasury markets are in chaos. Like everything is so fragile and so fractured and disjointed, and everyone is trying to make their play. And this is, and whether or not that narrative is really kind of the foundation, I think there is absolutely some degree of truth to it. There is some element there. Whether or not that's exactly the explanation for why it's happening, it certainly lends itself to explaining a lot of decisions that were made. So it's absolutely something that I've been exploring, and I'm trying to get more puzzle pieces to fit together to see if that picture really is really one that like enlightens a lot of the things that have been happening. Right. But I'd increasingly thought, and I've been talking about this on the show for 3 to 4 years, is that this is where we are headed, that everything is going to fracture, and there's going to be so many different people in power, or institutions in power, essentially vying for control as this thing splinters into 100 different pieces, that consensus everywhere is just going to fall apart. That's essentially what we had, is we had this like kind of soft geopolitical consensus. And for, 50 years, it has it's created this massive trend toward globalization. It's made so many countries actually systemically weak, because we became economically dependent on each other. And then you have like Gladstein broke down in the IMF and the structural adjustment book, short novel that he wrote for Bitcoin magazine. He broke down how essentially the developing world has been turned into specialized like manufacturing wings, for essentially Western countries. So they've like gutted their ability to domestically create food. They've gutted tons of their domestic, like critically, like independence important markets and industries in order to completely replace it with sugar that they export to the US, with cobalt that they mine for batteries and export to Western nations. And so they've essentially gutted their sovereignty to become wholly dependent upon Western nations. And then the Western nations basically, like as soon as there's any sort of unease in the air, as soon as that soft geopolitical peace starts to crumble or fall apart, well, now they've atrophied their market. They've atrophied any chance they had of being independent, and their economies just get eviscerated because they essentially imported their food, their clothes, their laundry machines, like every single thing in exchange for producing just the sugar that the UK and the US need. And then when the UK and the US supply chains start to break apart, when China is no longer taking in and repackaging their goods and then shipping it off to the US, and there's struggle there, and then the energy basically the war of energy resources between Russia and Europe start to come into play. All of these supply chains start breaking down, and now they're just sitting on a whole bunch of sugar that they don't even use themselves, and nothing to import. Then nobody's buying from them. And this is like starting to happen all over the place. Like you're just seeing like so many different countries, and everybody is basically like aggressively trying to isolate. They're trying to like resupply at home. They're trying to realize that, oh my God, we're not producing enough of our own food. We're not producing enough of our own energy. Like everybody is just kind of like, you bunker down. You bunker down and you realize, holy crap, I have none of the things that I actually need. And I think you're actually seeing this on kind of an individual level too. People are like, oh my God, I don't produce any of my own energy. I don't have a resource to get food or toilet paper. If it's not at the grocery store, what do I do? Like everybody, like the whole world together is just kind of splintering in its economic stability and robustness because we have built this systemic fragility that is finally starting to crack. And because it's so fragile, because we've been so interconnected, those cracks just like they just go everywhere, like so massively. And it's all dependent on the credit markets. It's all dependent on money printing. So if we lose that window of just creating more debt to get us over our last debt problem, and we just kind of push that to its natural conclusion, which is, negative interest rates and negative and 0% interest rates basically across the entire Western world. There's nowhere to go from there. You're running out of resources, just suck out of, to capital strip mine, as, Alan Farrington and Sasha Meyer's piece talking about how like we've, the farmer ate all his seed.
Right.
Like in an effort to get as much consumption as possible and to make those numbers look as good as possible, we went further into debt. And instead of planting next year's harvest, we ate all our seed, and the numbers look really good because we ate twice as much this year as we did last year.
Right.
But now it's nothing in the ground.
This is like the, it's just math argument, right? Which we've been discussing for years and years, as you said. Like at some point, this, however you want to characterize it, a Ponzi scheme, a house of cards, or whatever. I mean, at some point it becomes just unsustainable and it breaks down. And of course, I think we both make the argument it's been unsustainable for a long time. It's just that you're able to cover over or ignore or whatever all the people who it's impairing greatly, so the wealth gap argument and the rich getting richer and all those people falling through the cracks, like, well, just don't show them on the TV and act like they don't exist, and they don't exist. And then you can keep, but that keeps exacerbating the problem. And to your point, I mean, happening on a global level, happening on an individual level. And I think that's just always the case when you end up relying on and becoming dependent on a certain established order. And then once that, and depending on the quality of that order, i.e. how it's established, is it established by self-perpetuating mechanisms that allow it to become stronger and more secure and more stable over time? Or is it established through mechanisms that actually degrade over time? Like, let's say, the military hegemony of a given country and the currency that on which they base their empire, which, you know, broadly speaking, is kind of what we have now. And when those things begin to degrade, then the order that's been established upon them, that degrades as well. And it always, you know, the in Petersonian terms, right? When anytime you get a disruption of order, you invite the chaos in, and the chaos is both that churn that says like it's no longer tenable, the order you've established, but within the chaos is of course also that potential where you have to say, okay, well, how can things be reconstituted? And you know, this is where we insert Bitcoin fixes this, and we can touch on that a little bit later. But
yeah,
and I should say, for anyone who's listening to this later on, this is the Monday after the Silicon Valley Bank stuff, and over the course of the weekend, I guess on Sunday, the regulators, the Treasury, the Fed, not probably more Treasury, basically said they were going to make all depositors whole. This isn't a quote unquote bailout, but what they were going to do was allow all banks now to borrow against their Treasury bond, government bond holdings at par value. So they don't have to take the hit of the, you know, whatever it's been, 50-60% drawdown in the value of the bonds that they purchased, which in effect just means they can create a bunch more cash out of thin air, does it not? Because you can just say, oh, well, now we have 10 billion in bonds, I'm going to borrow against that, give me money, and then you create cash out of that. So it basically,
it's credit. It's more credit. It's credit,
right?
Backed by a credit instrument that doesn't even have the value that supposedly that credit instrument has. It's like me borrowing from my mortgage in the middle of 2008 or 2009 when I've lost 50% of the value of my house, but my mortgage says, you know, my original value of my house says is like, you know, worth $500,000 or whatever. Now it's only worth 200, right? But it says it's worth 500,000. Well, then I can borrow against that 500,000 to shore up my. It's so ridiculous. It's such a convoluted. It's such a childish, such an unbelievably childish. Like we're just gonna wave a magic wands and like make all of this crap go away. And as long as we paper over the numbers, it's like, no, we'll just say it's worth this.
So we can get into the because I know, I mean, there's the chorus of this is what everyone is talking about right now, and everyone has their difference of opinion on like who should be bailed out, if anybody, and how it should all be structured. We'll touch on that in a bit. But what do you think the implications are of enacting this policy? Because, you know, also another wrinkle in this is that the Fed funds futures has tanked, right? Because now people were expecting, you know, 5+, and now it's down to maybe even the high 3s. And, you know, I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking, one, this has got to be inflationary, so that it's going to perpetuate a problem that they already have. And I don't, you know, like the chaos may be a reason for pausing or cutting rates, but I'm looking at it and saying, they've just made it so all of their cronies and all the big holders of bonds are insulated from rate hikes. I mean, I know they took a snapshot, right? And so you're going to be able to get par value for your current holdings, not for future holdings, but still, I mean, they've taken away a lot.
Grandfathered in. They've grandfathered in.
So they've taken away a lot of the pressure that those rate hikes are having on the majority of the big bondholders. So I'm thinking, why wouldn't they continue to raise rates? I mean, I know things are kind of breaking, but one, if they really need to fight inflation, and two, if they have ulterior motives, which you alluded to earlier, why not keep hiking? Because now you've just insulated a shit ton of the people that are going to give you the most grief, that are going to be lobbying you hard, backdoor, all this kind of stuff, because those are, you know, those are your real constituents, let's say, and they just banking
killed all
interest.
The small banks.
Yeah.
They just eviscerated all the small competing banks, everything that's like popped up in the last like 5-10 years.
Yeah. So my question is this: what do you think the implications are of this particular policy? I mean, it seems like it was premeditated, but we can't know, so who cares? What do you think the implications are, and what do you think the impacts are on policy moving forward?
I honestly don't know. I am totally up, like going back to what I was alluding to at the very beginning of this was that like I saw like a really aggressive, like much more volatile short-term credit cycle. Is that I saw them attempting to raise interest rates and attempting to get inflation under control, and then something would really break, and they'd be forced right back into very serious QE. And in a sense, this is, QE, what, 5? I don't know, whatever the newest quantitative easing would be. It's in a slightly different mechanism. They've kind of created new backstop, but it amounts to exactly what you just said. It's money printing. It's just money printing with a different name and a different label on a different piece of paper, right? And for a very specific group of people, like the major 3, 4 banks, whatever, JP Morgan, Chase, like they've just profited massively. Although, I mean,
can you imagine
anybody
you wake up Monday morning
right now, just pulled their money out and took it straight to JP Morgan.
Dude, imagine you wake up Monday morning, you're these big banks and you've got 100 billion in underwater bonds, right? Let's say they're 50% underwater. And then you get a phone call, be like, yo, you can borrow against them at par
Don't
now.
worry.
And that's basically 50 billion in free cash you can just like that get access to. I mean, they must be having a party now in, certain top floors of Wall Street firms.
It's such bullshit. What's crazy is that they've totally nationalized banking. Like it's pretend, like it's like in this weird roundabout way. But I mean, like that was the crazy thing. Did you read the thing about a Signature Bank this morning?
What about it?
Their CEO or whatever, like Signature Bank just got like confiscated. They told them they had to just got snatched by the state authority. But the CEO, I think it was the CEO or the CFO, I'm not sure. But somebody came out and said that it didn't make any sense as to why, because they actually were not structurally broken. Like they did have a huge bank run and they had like a really rough, Friday and over the weekend or whatnot because of everything that happened with Silvergate and then obviously SVB, immediately following kind of as a response. Signature Bank obviously was being stress tested really heavily, but he said, but there was actually nothing, even with like where we were, they said the assets we could have sold to shore everything up. Like we were basically, by the time like middle of the day Sunday, it was pretty clear to us that we would be fine when it opened up Monday morning, like that we'd be able to handle everything and the money that moved away from us, like we'd be good. And then it was just like, boom, they got nationalized. Like the
that's
state
what happened.
Just took over
the feds
and took everybody. Yeah, management is out. Like they're not even involved anymore. They've just been completely kicked out of the bank. And he said that he literally thinks that this is a grab, like this is an explicit attack on like Bitcoin and crypto. That he thinks this is because this was a way to get at their bank because they do so much of the banking for the crypto space or whatever, and that it didn't really matter that they were solvent and that they could handle all of their deposits, that this was just a really good opportunity to just come in and snatch them. Now, I don't know. I mean, I just read an article and this is what the CFO says. Like, if I listen to what Sam Bankman-Fried said, like, like, so I don't really know, but that's an interesting statement coming from them to say that like, we weren't going to open Monday with like a big problem. And that, or at least with the problem that we were going to open with, it wasn't going to kill us. Like we were going to be fine. And that the bank just took over. I mean, the state took over the bank anyway.
Yeah. I mean, you can certainly imagine a scenario. I mean, because I don't drift into big coordinated conspiracies too often. And it's not because I'm not receptive to, collusion and stuff like that. I just think most stuff happens because one, people are stupid, and two, when things happen, there's like a conspiracy of interest, which could obviously be the case here, where it's like, okay, these banks are the ones that are in trouble. Which ones do we want to help? Well, those two kind of are a counter to our interests, and this one's less counter to our interests, or even it's there's a reason why we would want to help it out because it's big enough that it can be one of ours, as you said, like the kind of capture of the faux nationalization of these banks, let's say, even if it's not overt. And so it could just be as easy as that. It's like, yeah, let those guys fail. They've been kind of a thorn in our side. This one is bad politically if we let it fail, and maybe there's other reasons why we benefit from helping it out. So why don't we do that and see what happens? And we've kind of killed two birds with one stone, or at least dug another dagger in the former.
Yeah.
And
if your foundation is gone, you have no ethical restrictions. I mean, it's just like the what we saw with Twitter files. What we saw, like Thomas Massey just posted that talking about how they just had like a big meeting about all of this, and like one of the senators just said, do we have any mechanisms in place to censor social media, to censor Twitter or whatever, so that like rumors of bank runs can't cause problems in the banking system? And that the response was basically, we'll look into it, we'll see what we have. It's just like when you put all these things in place and nobody gives a shit, like nobody has even the slightest restraint, like nobody in federal government, Federal Reserve, central bank, any of those institutions give a flying fuck about rights or about like anybody's like safety outside of like their ecosystem. Like in their context, the government is the country.
Yeah,
like they are the will of the people. So whatever hurts their bank accounts is what's bad and evil and terrible for the country. And whatever's good for their PR is what they're going to do to make themselves, look good.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing. We're gutting the foundation of all of our economic stability for the sake of a few bankers and for the sake of what the government looks like they're doing.
Yeah.
To make it look like they're here to save everybody. And they don't give a shit. They don't give a shit. They probably don't know what the hell they're doing anyway. They're stupid and they're just using the tools that they have at their disposal. And those tools are just being used.
And 99% of people
with no ethics.
And 99% of the public would look at it and with compassion, let's say, will be like, oh yes, of course, and sure. let's say you're not a depositor or whatever, because obviously they want to be, made whole. But like most people would be like, well, why wouldn't the government come in? And there's no appreciation for just how those mechanisms work. Like this was part of your big thread that you put out recently. It's like, you do realize that like you can print money out of thin air, but you can't print value out of thin air, right? You can't print resources out of thin air. And so where do you think all, those resources to make those people whole in their, in purchasing power, let's say, where do you think that comes from? Well, that comes from everybody else. And it in particular comes from the people that aren't insulated from that debasement via being invested in assets or what have you. So it comes from people that hold cash balances, which is typically or almost exclusively the poor, right? People that live paycheck to paycheck, have small cash balances in their banks. They get diluted to bail out these people at these banks. And as you say, I mean, like, obviously it sucks, but like, what are we doing here? Like, yes, you as a depositor, you thought your deposit was safe in a bank and the bank fucked up and, you risk losing your deposits. And that obviously sucks. But again, so few people have an appreciation for, if you operate on the basis that every time that happens, someone's going to come bail you out, to say nothing of the moral hazard, but you're just operating in a system that just, like we said before, it cannot be self-sustaining over the long term. That is, that's literally the mechanism for it eating itself over the course of whatever time. And, again, those depositors would be like, don't give a fuck. Give me my 100K and I'm happy to let the system burn in 20 years, but everybody else, you'd like to think they could be looking at things with a little bit more clarity and logic, but I don't think we're holding our breath for that kind of stuff at this point.
Yeah. And it's funny, like the number of people who, and like, I get this. It's not like the mentality is hard to understand. Like the mentality is the default if you don't think about it really hard. Is that like everybody's saying, like, oh, well, we bail out Ukraine and we bail out, like, why can't we bail out the depositors? And it's like, if that's what we do every single time, we just do this until we're all fucking dead. Like we do this until we've destroyed everything. Like we've done this for 30 years, basically. Like we've done this since the 99 and the 2001 bubble. Like they essentially started a very small version of what then really blew up and got out of control in the 2008 great financial crisis. And when do we actually have any restraint? When do we actually care that
ain't
this
happening,
means
baby,
that the poor are getting eviscerated over and over again. And it's like, yeah, it's sad. It sucks balls that depositors are going to lose their jobs, that startups are not going to be able to pay payroll. But what about the people that lost their fucking jobs over the last 3 years? Like, you realize that these things aren't disconnected. It's the same economy. Those resources come from somewhere. You can't just steal tens of billions of dollars worth of actual stuff, food, clothes, housing, like infrastructure, gas, all of this stuff, and think that nobody lost tens of billions of dollars of food and resources and gas and housing. Like, it did. So when you see that there's now a $200 billion gap between the poor and the richest people in society, and you're like, how did the poor get all these resources taken away from them? And how did the rich keep getting richer? You're doing it. You're doing it right now. This is it. Every single time things got a little bit difficult, you cheated. You cheated the fucking system so that somebody else paid for your mistakes. And I know the depositors aren't responsible for this, but how is anybody else responsible for it? Mm-hmm. Who pays? Somebody fucking pays. God, it's just infuriating that, like, just look. Like, these things aren't disconnected. Like, housing is not supposed to just go up by 20% every year, you know? Like, like, you shouldn't have to get a 30% wage increase to just kind of like stay stable in your life and your living standards. Mm-hmm. That's where the resources are coming from. I know it's 2-3 steps removed. I know it's hard to see, but that is actually what is happening. And all of these, and everybody's just like, but we're bailing out Ukraine. Yeah, we also shouldn't be doing that. Like, this should be the response every single time they put any amount of money on the table, saying that we're going to do this, we're going to print this, we're going to issue this credit, we're going to just guarantee these loans. It's all the same mechanism. It's allowing someone to consume real, scarce, poor and middle class people desperately needed resources for nothing. Yeah. With no contribution of their own, no real value or anything. There is a pool of economic goods, and we're running out of it. And we're just saying that, yeah, just let the banks keep using it up. Let the rich keep using it up. Let the startups. I mean, you think about, like, we're in a credit crisis. We're in the worst debt, like unsustainable debt ratio as we've been since the Great Depression, since World War II, for crying out loud. Mm-hmm. Why is it our focus to prop up economic experiments? We should be propping up the economic foundation. We are literally letting the foundation crack and crumble around us. It's like the example I actually used in a conversation with somebody was like going back to the 2007 housing.
I saw that. It's a good analogy.
Bubble,
yeah.
Was that it's as if it was Muzz. It was Muzz. I mean, Muzz were going back and forth about it. The 2007 housing crisis. The reason it was a crisis is because we went into debt to start more housing projects than we actually had the wood, the nails, the labor to complete. We did not have the resources, but we did have the debt because we can just print the debt straight out of thin air, right? Mm-hmm. So we hadn't cut down the trees, but we were already building the houses. And we've been playing catch up this whole time. So to bail out all of the startups is similar to saying, let's bail out and complete all of these houses, even though we don't have the resources, when the problem is literally that we started too many houses. Yeah. And in that same vein, we have way too many startups. We should not be experimenting economically. We should literally be going back local. We should get our foundation back in place. We need to expand and shore up the cinder blocks that are underneath all of this thing, because they are crumbling into sand right now. Mm-hmm. We should be doing fewer experiments until we have a robust foundation of savings to build off of, and then we can properly price the startups and the experiments that make sense and are best aligned with the problems that we have, rather than just kind of throwing all of our resources, just like throwing shit into the wind and just seeing if anything sticks. We have no resources. We are absolutely, shockingly in debt. Mm-hmm. We owe way more than we are producing. we have got to stop figuring out how to just frivolously use up more and more resources. We need to do the exact opposite. We need to save. We need to cut the fat. We need to default on all the projects that just don't even look, that aren't even like the best of the best. Like we need to take all of the projects and go ahead and throw away anything that's even questionable, and then take the like 2% left over, and then go ahead and do another elimination filter on that of like, what is the stuff that really, really is going to work and is really, really important, and everything else we just need to cut the fat, and we need to stop, we need to save, and we need to get back to real production and real foundational work. And it's like we found out we had like just a little bit of seed left over as a farmer, and it's like, well, let's eat that too. It's like, oh, let's fucking plant something. Let's plant something for next year. Jesus Christ.
But this is the tragedy and the insanity of a distorted price signal, because as you say, that signal is saying there's lots of demand and lots of resources to build those houses or to sustain those startups. Oh, great. Well, I'm a builder, I'm a founder, so those signals are telling me there's ample resources to meet my expectations of what's available in the market. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. But it's not true, right? There's that nail and timber and demand for houses. It's actually not there. It's 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% less, whatever it is. And the same is true for startups. And, you know, this is the thing that I feel like a lot of these, the people that were defending bailouts, you know, making startup deposits whole and stuff like that, just don't understand. I mean, one is that point that you said. I mean, like, sure, you can say, oh, like, well, if these startups fail, like, think of all the innovation that goes away. It's like nothing real of value will actually be lost, especially long term. Like, yes, it'll be painful, people lose their jobs, all that kind of stuff. But the way markets work is, okay, there was a tremendous distortion there. Well, when these institutions, when these businesses have to wind down, there will be people there with capital that would look and say, what's valuable here? What's actually good here? Okay, 90% not interested. 10%, that's interesting. I can build from there. I can, you know, turn that into something once again. I can match that more appropriately to what the real market is actually demanding and has the capacity to sustain. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to recycle it in that way. And that's how free markets are, you know, function optimally, right? So that the good can be turned into even better, so that that 10% can be turned into a better foundation moving forward for something of value to build upon. And the rest that was the result of loose money, false expectations, misallocations of capital, distorted price signal, that goes away as it should. But if you don't let that happen, if you say, oh, bail it out because, oh my God, we're going to lose all this innovation, all you just get is more zombies. All you get is more distortion. All you do is put yourself in a more impaired position in the future to properly price capital, to properly project out into the future, to properly meet market demands. And you just stay on that teat of that false money. And that's what's happened. And it's funny because a lot of the people that were, particularly in the case of like the startup aspect of this thing, that were promoting, you know, bailing out all these startups. I mean, otherwise, at least they would proclaim to be people that have a fairly laissez-faire free market orientation. And it's weird that they don't see the long-term faults of, you know, treating this situation in the manner that they're promoting.
Yeah. It's hard to see that your values have been manipulated, you know, like it's hard to, it's hard to see anything outside of your perspective. So even if you have like this kind of like laissez-faire mentality, those things get tested when you're laissez-faire out of a bank account, you know? And you know, I use an analogy.
But that's kind of sorry to interrupt, but that is that not kind of like the real test of virtue or character in a sense? It's when, even when 100%. Bad stuff befalls you stay true to what the principles or the values, the virtues that you believe are most true and right and good. Like, isn't that the test? Like if some, you know,
and that's it. Yeah.
When Bitcoin goes down, we don't look for
when.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Everybody can be nice when everything's nice, you know?
Right.
Question is, how do you behave when the shit hits the fan.
And how much do you believe in
your principles?
The capacity of those principles to actually foster and generate a better world, a better life for yourself, a better community, a better country, that kind of stuff? Because that's the whole point of having them, right? Like, which values are the most conducive to flourishing, broadly speaking? And when things like this happen and you're willing to bend them, abuse them, adopt a different set just because you're the one that's in the firing line this particular time, I don't know. It just screams to me like a lack of conviction and or understanding in the true purpose of having values and principles and virtues in the first place. It's not, it's as you say, I mean, it's not just for convenience. And when it happens to you, like, oh, you take a different perspective. It's that if you truly believe that they're the best way to orient yourself and to foster, again, broadly speaking, flourishing. And you believe, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, despite the pain that I might be suffering, I still believe that they're the right things. And so I'm not going to just jump ship because I'm the one that's suffering right now, because, because ultimately, even though, there's many caveats here, it was my fault. I put the money in the bank. I started the startup based on a distorted, cost of capital, whatever it may be. Yes, there's many people at fault, but I'm definitely one of them. And it's just, it's, I can't say I'm surprised, but it's fiat thinking, let's say. And I think, maybe this is, most people listening will already know this, but like we talk about these things, I think, because they're relevant, they're current events, we're interested in them, and they do affect lots of people's lives. But, the public service announcement at this point should obviously be, this is why we Bitcoin, so that we can extricate ourselves, at least to a large degree, from these fiat clown world machinations and events. But I think it's important to have these discussions, because we help elucidate what the differences between those two realms are, right? We help elucidate that, why we Bitcoin and why we choose something like Bitcoin that enshrines certain principles and certain rules and things like that, and align ourselves with that so that we are not subject to the ever-shifting sands of public opinion, of laws that can be contravened, of, principles or values that can be flexible when convenient, all that kind of stuff, and it's this is the tension, I guess, between the two worlds. And I think these events will invite a lot of people in, because it's, drip by drip, of course, but there's got to be an impression on, at least for some people, that like, man, this is all too flexible. It's all just like, maybe I was on the winning end this time, the losing end, but like, I'd rather be in a set of rules that just don't change. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Like, how could you possibly bet your future when you have zero clue which way it's going to go? Like, which way it's going to be decided by the powers that be, so to speak. I think it comes down to, in a lot of ways, it comes down to, when times get tough, or you make a bad decision, or you do something wrong, or maybe you make what seemed like a good decision, but it still takes you to a bad place for lack of knowledge or lack of information or just circumstance. Do you change your principles, or do you change yourself? And for most people, it's a whole lot easier to change your principles.
Right.
Is to just kind of mold them to fit the situation, to, kind of protect your self-identity, that I don't make mistakes. I was right. I didn't do anything wrong. And normally reality will step right up and just punch you square in the face if you do that. But society has made us collectively punished for this mistake. And when money is no longer connected to that reality, it becomes this way to lie to ourselves. It becomes this tool to cheat that reality. And so money is no longer a tool to readjust and force that change. And instead, it becomes a political tool to reinforce changing the principles, to lie to ourselves, to give us this delusion that we can cover this up, that we can just pretend that the reality wasn't the way it was, and I didn't make any mistakes. but it's a cancer. It's literally a cancer.
Yeah.
And it just guts everything. I mean, like, think about how fragile everything is. Like, how pathetic the economy is. That senators are literally talking about like the banking system collapsing because of somebody tweeting. Like, if something is going to die because somebody tweeted, let it die.
Yeah.
Like it's not,
There's
like,
no
that
hope.
thing is not, we should not be depending on that thing in any way, shape, or form. If the wrong tweet can kill it, it is not a safe thing to be invested in. Like, holy crap. If our political structure, if our democracy, if our banking system is that weak, Jesus Christ, we need to rethink how this thing is built, because nothing that society depends on should be that weak. And it's just crazy.
But,
it's just crazy that we have engineered this.
Yeah.
You know,
but what you're saying there, I think this is the right term to use. But it's one that came to mind, but it makes me think of like a Faustian bargain sort of thing, right? Like, so you get all these people, you know, individually, but collectively, let's just, I know there's nuance here, but making mistakes for which reality would have previously or in different times would give them the corrective feedback, i.e. the punch in the face, and they would be forced to take responsibility for it, change, and move forward more in line with what reality is dictating. And that, you know, fiat and the institutions of government and everything that's been built up around that is kind of the person offering that bargain, saying, look, you vest the power in me. You give yourself over to me. You sell your soul, as it were, to me, and I will absolve you of that responsibility. I will absolve you of that sin. And all you have to do is give me the power and, you know, rely on me and trust in me. I mean, you even use, and many of us do, like you, a few minutes ago, you used the term the powers that be. I mean, the apparatus and the institutions of government and banking, and, you know, obviously largely the same thing, have become so all powerful in the world today, in conjunction with perhaps a vacuum left over by a decline in religious belief. You know, that's a whole separate conversation there. But all just to say, I think so many people, and very few would admit this, treat the government as an all-powerful being. So that's why you don't get questions like, well, where does the money come from? Where does the money come from to give to Ukraine? Where does the money come from to make these depositors whole? Like, people are told, like, well, you're going to pay for it in taxes somewhere, but it doesn't land the same because people don't really understand how
it's
it
too
works.
Abstract, too distant, it's too far away, you know.
But isn't it? And I think that's what creates, or at least perpetuates, this kind of moral cancer, if you will, that becomes inculcated in people in the society because they've made that deal with the devil. They've said, you absolve me of my mistakes and I will give myself up to you. And, you know, I know that's somewhat dramatic language, but is that not kind of the circumstance?
That's exactly what's going on. I mean, we can say that that's like a little bit like out there as far as a description, but it's like, you know, the point of, you know, religious explanation or religious narrative is to explain what it's like to be human, you know, explain the nature of humanity. That's what we've done. And we've set up a system, or the design of the system that we are part of is such that the reward for that bargain, for that Faustian bargain, is extremely visible and marketed as such. Like, it's as much in front of us as it possibly can be, and the cost is as hidden as it can be.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so it's this huge asymmetry between what are we getting out of it versus what is it costing us. And so it lends us to attribute all of the obvious reward to the system that we're taking advantage of, and we want to believe that that's the good thing, and that because I've made this bargain, I've made the right decision, that I'm a good person, and this is just the good part of society, and that anything that's negative is just natural. It's just that, like, people suck, and, you know, we need more government. We need more of this direct reward in order to undo like the fact that the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer, because that's just evil capitalism and evil free markets.
The solution to every
free markets,
right? The solution to every problem that emerges is vesting more power in that entity
into
right,
and that's doubling down
the
on
perpetuation of the bargain. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's so funny to me that like people talk about like, oh, we have to have government money. We have to have inflation. Like I had this conversation with somebody, and it was funny. They didn't respond after we got to this point, which I don't know if that's just like didn't want to hear it and he got too angry and stormed off and never came back to it, or if it really made him go,
Twitter tap out.
Crap, I don't know. That's a decent point. Was that probably not the second one, but I'll dream. He left. Yeah. He's not a part of the conversation anymore. I can imagine whatever I want. Was that because I basically forced him to, and I was being nice, by the way. I'm not like trying to be a shithole and being like, have fun staying poor, you dummy. But I was trying to get him to isolate and just say, like, what are the consequences of this? Because the political like mainstream ideas of like what is caused by inflation and what is caused by free market money and deflation and how terrible that would be are really kind of comically contradictory. Like they're deeply self-evidently contradictory. And all you have to do is realize that what we live in now is the system that they proclaim we need. And it's just incredible to me that everything that's happened over the last 50 years is to be blamed on free market and sound money and the natural market forces. And yet we have an inflationary central bank, like incentivized consumption system. But everything that has happened is not a result of that system. Like it's like literally drinking like a tub of like Clorox and then getting incredibly sick and having diarrhea. And it's like, I can't believe that the human body is just so crappy at this. And that, well, I need to drink more Clorox to make myself healthy. It's like, you just drank the Clorox and this is the result. Like what we live in today, any complaint that you have cannot be taken out. It cannot be separated from the fact that we have a fiat system, that we have a central banking system, that we have a government. Like, think about the idea that politics is explicit about the fact that what they do incentivizes consumption. That is our whole goal. But overconsumption and frivolous, like, materialism is a product of just naturally evil people. It's like, bitch, you just said that we were going to incentivize this, and then you got this, and then you said, I can't believe people are naturally so terrible. It's like, no, that's what that means. That's what it means to incentivize consumption, is to make people more frivolous, is to make people more materialistic, is to incentivize them to buy cheap, meaningless shit when they shouldn't have otherwise done it, and they would not have done it. And then to incentivize investment. The whole financial system becomes massive bloated casino of just speculation and chaos. You just incentivize the financial system over things that don't matter. Like you just said, we're going to dump a whole lot more money in the financial system. It becomes a corrupt casino. Well, what the fuck? Dump money into anything. What is it going to become? Like it just like you got what you wanted. You got what you wanted. This is just what it looks like. This is exactly what it looks like. So don't bitch.
Yeah.
Don't complain. You got what you wanted.
There's almost a framing that at least is emerging in my mind right now that works. And it's like all of this stuff could just be a result or a continuation of that, metaphorical selling your soul to the state, right? It's like, well, somewhere deep down, you've given up what is most important. And as a result, you find all the different ways to conceal that. Consumerism, substance abuse, whatever. And it just further attaches you and incentivizes you to adhere and align and agree with the dictates of that all-powerful entity, because you don't want it to be wrong. It's the one that's stewarding your fucking soul. Again, being somewhat dramatic, but you know what I'm saying? And so like that's why was it Orwell or
Cool.
Solzhenitsyn that was like, the party asks you to, basically deny what you see and hear with your own eyes in favor of, what they tell you is real or something like that. Right. And it's that kind of a thing. It's like, even though and fuck, man, I mean, we're talking about the financial system, which is very opaque, even to people that spend their whole life looking at it. I mean, we have had several instances in the last couple of years where literally the truth is just on a video in front of you and you can watch it, but that all powerful entity is saying something that contradicts what you're seeing. And most people go with the latter. Most people go with the explanation from the all powerful entity. And again, it's like, you wonder why aren't more people deploying logic and reason and rationale here? It just does not make sense. And again, I think they're so intertwined and wrapped up. And again, that deal they've made with this, subconsciously made with this entity, it's like, it's painful to detach from it, to contradict it, to depart from its comfort, to depart from the warmth and security that it provides you. And I think that's at least part of the reason why it seems like so many people are so illogical and so irrational these days, because they've adhered to that thing, and they'll do whatever it says, and they'll align their opinion and perspective with whatever it says. And as we both know, that very thing is itself founded on lies and deceit and unfairness and, all the other things that we want to stick on the what's the word I'm looking for? It'll come to me, but basically the like the, hold on. What's fuck, I want to get this word. It's not immorality, but it's something like that, of that institution, right? Because they're so disintegrated, unintegrated with the truth. They've had to be, immoral in all these different areas. And when you attach yourself to something that has the incentive to, survive that and continue to perpetuate that, that system of, let's say, immorality. Again, I'm blanking on the word, but that'll suffice for right now. Then
it's just a fallacy. Like, well, it's just wrong. Like, it's just false.
But the people that align with it end up being strung along with it, and they are equally irrational, and they are equally, out of congruence with truth and reason and logic.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, and there was a really good, it's like a little short snippet or something that like just always stuck with me. The way he made the argument was that like falsities matter,
right?
Like, because they're wrong, because they're false. They literally do not line up with reality. So if you believe something that is false, like, you are going to make decisions that have consequences in the real world. If whatever you are believing has any consequence whatsoever with what you are doing in the real world, it's going to mean disaster. It's just a question of like how long it takes. And you talk about like the difficulty in like breaking away from that comfort. It's a form, I think it's partly like, it's part of growing up, like, is to realize that nobody, like, you really are the only one looking out for you, that like it's becoming an adult, so to speak. And I don't mean that in like a mean sense. It's like, oh, everybody's a child and I'm not, I'm better than that. Like, I don't mean that like looking down on people, but that is something that we hold on to, that comfort. I remember that in like kind of my college years, when I found, like, when I was starting to go down the Austrian economics rabbit hole, and like shortly thereafter, like waking up to the libertarian idea is scary as shit. To think that it's so nice to think that the right people are in charge, the good guys won, and they have everything taken care of, and I'm just going to listen to them. And our entire education system just kind of teaches that it doesn't teach you how to think. It doesn't teach you how to figure things out. It just gives you a shit ton of stuff to memorize and tells you who is right and what they think, right? Like it's just regurgitate. So you can spend thousands and thousands of hours learning something that's completely wrong, but know it in extensive detail with tons of different, arguments and relationships and all this stuff, and still just be fucking wrong. And we invest in our worldview. We make decisions based on that. We let ourselves, like even now, like I see myself wanting to just like excuse things, be like, it's like, okay, maybe there's a housing crisis. I guess it'll be fine. I have a mortgage and, again, I just like, I don't want to think about it. And people talking about like they're injecting cows with the COVID vaccine, and that literally seeing spike protein show up in meat, and you're like, and it's just like, I got too many I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
I just think that it's going to be okay. And that I won't respond. I won't change my ways. I won't make a decision, or I'm just going to keep going to the grocery store and picking up my meat. And then like I stop and I think it's like, I can't do that. I can't, like, I know I want to do that. I know I just want to like let that go away and not have to have that responsibility and to think about that. But I got to go talk to the guy at the farmer market. I got to find out whether or not he, like, I don't want to make that bet. I don't play Russian roulette,
Right.
And I feel like so many people are in that position. And like, when you tell them like, by the way, the banking system, the entire political apparatus, the thing that you think is the world, like it just encompasses your vision of reality. Yeah, it's kind of bullshit. Like that's a whole different thing. Then I got to find a different place to find a steak. Like that's that's like 3 levels larger.
But it's, as far as
problems go,
as you said, it's incredibly disruptive, because your perspective, your worldview is how you see reality. And, people can tolerate minor adjustments to that, or at least some people can. These days it seems like it's a pretty rigid thing, but like minor adjustments are obviously easier to contend with. But when you're confronted with like things that really shake your worldview, like whether it has to do with religion, whether it has to do with your money and your savings, whether it has to do with your government, like if something, and this is what's really interesting about Bitcoin, right? Because like usually those sorts of things are pretty impervious to disruption, because it's literally what holds you together. It's literally what stops you from looking out at the world and freaking the fuck out about the chaos that it represents, that worldview. And so it's sacrosanct, literally, and people will not allow disruption to it. And that's why it's so amazing when disruption actually happens. Like we saw over the last 2 years, a lot of people took the proverbial red pill, right? And they're not even, let's say, Bitcoiners yet. They didn't take the orange pill yet, but a lot of people just woke up and their worldview was penetrated. They're like, wow, things are really not as I thought they were. Things are far more corrupt. Things are far more controlled. Things are far more yada, yada, yada. And that's, I think a good thing, but suffice to say, like the point is just that somehow some things can penetrate that. And then what I think is on display, let's say in the Bitcoin space, and with your example with the meat, once, especially if your worldview gets penetrated with something that obviously you think is more truthful, but it's super disruptive and it requires a reframing of things. I think because that's so overwhelming, because of all the things that your worldview was holding in place, you end up scaling back as much as possible. You say, okay, I need to reconstruct a worldview here based on what seems to be a greater form or version of the truth, but I can't do that with everything all at once. And because that worldview was holding up a lot. I was conditioned from the day I was born to have a certain worldview, and now it's dramatically different. And this is why I think you have to distill down to what is most important, what is most valuable. And there are other reasons for this, like opportunity costs.
It's literally a
restructuring.
Preference.
Yeah. Like, and that's why, like,
start back at like the basic building block and then reconstruct all of how does everything attach to this? Because before you had this really kind of like convoluted apparatus that encompassed everything, but it was based on this very specific kind of web of ideology that connects them all together. and then that web breaks apart. You just kind of get, and that's why you resist it so hard, is because it's how you relate to everything, like everything in your life, the decisions you make, whether or not you listen to the doctor when you go, like listen to their advice. I mean, Jesus, look what happened in 2020 and 2021 with the respect and to healthcare. God, more people woke up that like these people are not, and it's not like they're bad people. Like my doctor is not a bad person, but I should not be listening to him.
He's operating through a faulty worldview, and he's imposing that worldview, or at least, you know, sharing it with you, and it's not serving you as much as it could be. And that's exactly the point, right? And so let's call it you could also say it's like kind of a crisis in trust, right? Because all those institutions or ideas that construct your worldview, you no longer have faith in them. There's another word that, you know,
it's like being
out
betrayed.
Of the religious lexicon. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so you look around
by somebody you care about,
and everything has to be recapitulated. And again, that's an overwhelming task. So you go, okay, what's most important? My health, my money, my family, my sustenance. What are like the baseline things that I need to recapitulate in a way that's more truthful, or that I can place more faith or trust in? And this is why I think, you know, as a result of the last 2 years and monetary stuff, like especially again on display in Bitcoin land, people are looking at the source of their food now and being like, where's it come from? Like, what are all the details about it? Because I need to reconstruct and gain greater trust and faith over my source of food. And you do that for money, and like over time, you'll be able to, and this is one of the amazing benefits of Bitcoin, I would say, and that, you know, for whatever reason, and that's a deep rabbit hole to discuss the reasoning, but just to say that if it acts as a catalyst for that process of, analyzing all the different areas of your life and trying to capitulate them with a greater degree of truth, and then using that to slowly construct a worldview that is founded on a more stable, a more secure basis, so that the way you see the world, the reality that you perceive, is a closer approximation of truth than it was before. And again, there's a type of faith wrapped up in that, because it's saying, if I can align myself with truth better, more closely, if I can be more coherent with truth, then I'm going to benefit. My life is going to benefit. I'm going to be happier, stronger, more resilient, have more options, all that kind of stuff. I mean, and that's kind of a metaphysical discussion right there, because it's super interesting. Why would you, I mean, apart from what you alluded to earlier, it's like, well, reality will punch you in the face if you don't cohere with it. So there's obviously an incentive to avoid being punched in the face, walking off the edge of the cliff, losing all your money sort of thing. But I do think there's more wrapped up in it. It's like, there's a metaphysical kind of bargain with the truth. You know, we talked about that bargain with the state. Well, the bargain with the truth is, okay, I'll do my best to perceive and integrate you as much as I can, to see the truth clearly and integrate it into my life as much as I can. The payoff, or the reward, is that life becomes more fulfilling, more secure, more peaceful, and all those different things, and
more meaningful.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's, and those are like the two, you could construe what's happening on a level, at least, that those are the two, competing things. Sell your soul to the entity that says they're going to make everything all right for you, or align yourself with the thing that's going to force you to take responsibility for all those things in your life, and capitulating them with as much truth as you possibly can, and which one do you want? And now, of course, Bitcoin stands in the middle saying like, well, we can sweeten the deal for you if you want to go with the latter, adopt Bitcoin. And a lot of that stuff may happen naturally, and your work and your labor and your energy will be secured, and available to you in the future. And, so that's obviously a huge incentive as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what's happening, is that, and that's the reason why more people don't see this kind of stuff, because we are discussing fundamental worldviews here, and how difficult they are to penetrate, and how uncomfortable they are to disrupt. And if you're not of the sort of mind, maybe it's a matter of disagreeableness, maybe it's a matter of courage to look at yourself and your worldview and be like, try to appraise it honestly and say, where does it need change? If you're not one of those sorts of people, then you're going to probably go for the easy solution. You're going to go for the less thoughtful, the more mindless sort of solution. Well, look, here's this entity offering me everything on a silver platter. I'd be stupid not to take it. That's my guy. I'm going to align with everything there. And if they tell me to ignore what my eyes and ear, my eyes see and my ears hear, I'm going to do it because they're the boss.
Yeah. And I think it also lends to understanding why shifts like this happen incredibly slowly, but accelerate on themselves, is because like we are deeply social creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And, like let's say you're in a community with 100 people and you have all of these forces just naturally to resist changing your worldview, to resist believing that you have invested your entire life in just an completely incorrect line of thinking, that you have made decisions that have actually made you vulnerable, that have made you dependent, and have caused you problems as opposed to presented solutions, that you have done the best thing that you thought you could do for your children, and that maybe you even harmed them. That you not only did you not do good, but you may have caused explicit damage that you are now trying to clean up. That is not an easy truth to come to terms with. I mean, think about like how hard the vaccine injured, like how difficult it would be to mentally deal with that if that was somebody that you loved that did that was your child. And then at the exact same time, if everybody in your community believes that same lie or has that same worldview, how unbelievably lonely it would be to wake up to that, to realize
if
like,
you're
so
even able
only
to maintain your conviction in your own worldview. You're familiar with the experiment, can't remember, Stanford, or it happened, I think in the 70s or 80s, where they basically, one guy is the real test subject and the other 5 are like plants. And they show something on the screen and they ask like, which ball is bigger, which line is higher.
Longest. Yeah.
And all 4 of them.
I love that one.
Yeah. And they answer the wrong way. And the guy who's the test subject is looking at them, and it's like, and this is a perfect example, because when the situation you're describing causes people to doubt their own reasoning, right? Their own thinking,
sanity.
Their own logic, their own sanity. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so then they default to the thing that doesn't cause them to question it like that. Like, maybe I am kind of fucked up. We all have our problems, right? So, all right, maybe I'm wrong here. I'm just going to, if the mass is forming in one way, why not just form with them? And I can avoid the internal tension of seeing things differently.
And going back to that, that's why I think when these things really start to change, when you get that, when you break that tipping point of like the size of the community, and why it's important to be both uncompromising and inviting. Inclusivity is not watering down your language. Inclusivity is not like sacrificing the principles or your argument. It's being nice about disagreeing with people, and being completely open to letting them join you, even if they have been wrong, to allowing them forgiveness for making the mistake or latching on to a worldview that was incorrect, because we were all there. Like none of us have the benefit of saying that we didn't make a mistake or we didn't believe something stupid in the past. Like I certainly don't. Like, yeah. And in that context, like when you actually have a community, when you actually start to build out, when people start to collectively question, and you have somebody to share that with, it becomes this massive relief to kind of let go of it. And it's no longer a lonely place. And it kind of feels like we're getting there with the breakdown of trust in institutions. Is there is now a community to, and not to say it doesn't come with all the social problems that social environments come with. But if you leave the normie worldview, the traditional establishment narrative, in the hundreds of different ways that you can see its contradictions, or that you can come to question whether or not it is actually serving you in any way. When you leave that, you don't have to be alone anymore. And the internet in particular is a great way to connect people. Like there are still people that in their local social circles don't know a single Bitcoiner, don't know anybody who has the first knowledge of Austrian economics. And they come to the Bird app or Noster and they're like, oh my God, I'm not by myself. You know, like I'm not alone in this.
Yeah.
And that accelerates with time. Like as that builds out and you do find somebody in person. I found somebody in person who knew who I was, which was crazy. Like a Bitcoiner. Like I went to a coffee shop that I go to all the time, and like somebody like pulled back from the bar. He's like, "Are you guys Swann?" I was like, "What?
Have you read more about Bitcoin than anybody I know?"
There's a Bitcoiner here that I don't know. And like it's like things are growing and things are expanding, and it's just as much as there's so much to be sad about, and there's so much to see crumbling. In parallel with it, the replacement is growing, the building blocks are being put into place, and a new foundation is being built, and there is a community there that you can share these frustrations and fears with, and you don't have to be alone in them. And I think as painful as the transition is going to be, I think it's ultimately a really, really good thing. And
totally. And
we're
importantly,
on a good path,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And importantly, it's not just, you know, like getting together and sharing your grievances about the world, because, you know, there's a therapeutic value to that, but it's not very constructive or productive. What's amazing about what we're wrapped up in is not only do you have that aligned values, let's say, or that camaraderie, or however you want to articulate it, you know, where you're kind of sharing those newfound worldviews, and it's less isolating as a result. But also it's like, oh, we're also building and sharing and contributing to the very thing that's going to serve as a solution to all that. And that is just so much more invigorating. And I also think, you know, and I discuss this quite a bit, but you know, we've all done our share of orange pilling until we're blue in the face. We've, you know, talked about this is the word I was looking for earlier, illegitimate. So in terms of like the state Leviathan, the illegitimate nature of it. Fuck. But you know, we can talk about that until we're blue in the face, and we can point out all the problems over the last 2 years, whatever. And that's not really, you know, good ammo to penetrate the worldview we've been discussing, because, you know, again, people get on their guard at that point. But what's really good, because everyone wants to be happier, to have more options in life, to have more meaning in life, you know, even if they don't know how to get it, even if they don't recognize it, there's something innate. You look out on the world, and if people, as you said, we're social creatures, and there's a lot of mimicry going on. So when we see people succeeding, we're like, what are they doing? How are they doing that? And success obviously is construed in many ways, but I think universally it's like happy, options, strong, you know, like I don't think those are very contentious. And this is what I think is the most powerful orange pilling, and therefore the most powerful ammunition to, you know, break through those, the defenses of those worldviews. And what's beautiful about it is it's not even an active, you know, assault, let's say. It's just happening passively, because as this Bitcoin space grows, and as all the people that, you know, come into it and adopt it are beginning to feel and realize the benefits of it, and they're integrating them into their own life, and they're experiencing the beneficial changes, and they become happier, they become involved in work that they find more meaningful, families, diet, strength, community, all that kind of stuff, optimism about the future, which is sorely lacking today, obviously. You throw all that stuff together, and it ends up just being really attractive to pretty much anybody, you know? And so all those people that are looking for, even if subconsciously, a solution, or even just things that they want. How do I get the things that I want? They didn't think it was from the guy yelling at them about Bitcoin or the illegitimacy of the state, but they look at people that are just, you know, broadly speaking, living a good life, and they're going to say after a while, what are they doing? What is the thing that what aspect of their worldview do they have that I'm lacking? And that will send them on their own journey down the rabbit hole all by themselves. You know, so I think our biggest obligation, if we care to contribute to the acceleration of this change, is just, again, this is, you know, corny and cliche, but be the best that we can be in terms of integrating the truth and the benefits and the optionality and the freedom that this technology provides into our lives as much as possible, and not be ashamed about what results from doing that. I think that's nothing would be more powerful than that, or is more powerful than that.
It goes right in line with the idea of like relocalizing or whatever, is that like people are really bad at listening, or people very unlikely to, not bad like it's a skill they should have, but they're extremely unlikely to change or respond to something because they are told something.
Totally.
It is when they see, experience, or feel a thing. And the best way to prove that aligning with reality, aligning with Bitcoin and the reality that it reflects into the economy, is basically by being example. An example is like the best way to show that that is the better life is by living a better life, literally.
Yeah.
Like people will respond to, you say like, you know, you respond to the wealthiest person in the room. It's like, how did finance become the center of culture and the economy? Because the finance people were the wealthiest people in the room. They were the ones that appeared to have everything together. They were just making bukus of money. And not to say that making money is the thing that will lend to that confidence, but that it is certainly a piece of it, but more it's that in the lack of conviction, in the lack of like strong values or principles, you point at who's making the money, right? Like when there isn't like a strong ideology to land on, you go to something materialistic, you go to something shallower, that gives you shorter term benefit, right?
Yeah, and
so
those...
who is embracing most? Who has the most benefit of that? Who gets this? Who gets the most sex and the shiniest car and the, you know, like this sort of thing? And then that becomes the culture. Like we change. We literally change based on who in the room, like in our social circles, like, and it has, you know, generational consequences. It gets worse and worse with time. And so you incentivize finance, you make the game of the economy one of just moving numbers around and getting filthy rich, and you disconnect it from like the boots on the ground, the pulling the oil out of the ground, the grunt work, the, you know, turning the wrench. You separate it from the boots on the ground reality, and you have people who just like, doesn't matter. We don't need those people. We don't need wrenches. You know, we're gonna service economy our way into prosperity. Like, nah, dude. Like all that shit is icing on the cake, and you don't have a cake anymore. So
yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and I think it's and we're speaking in absolutes, so obviously there's there's always nuance, but I think the broader point is just that when the system, you know, so the financial system, the monetary system that doles out the rewards for creating value in a given market, when that is primarily predicated on which behaviors permit, you know, co-option or advancement within that system. And basically now I'm alluding to, like, if that system is receptive to the most, let's say, pathologically power hungry amongst us, the most the ones with the most fluid principles, the ones most happy to compromise on their ethics, the ones who most engage in immoral behavior. If the system is actually rewards that, incentivizes that, and so those people get to the top of that very system and then can manipulate it in their favor, then you're going to elevate those very you know, motives in the behavior of everyone downstream of that. So you elevate, you know, the kind of unethical, immoral, self-serving behavior. And I think, you know, again, broad brushstrokes, but I think we broadly see that in you know, so-called fiat culture today. What I think is interesting is that what I'm observing in the Bitcoin parallel system is because nobody can co-opt it. No individual can get up there and change the rules and make them favor themselves or a particular group of people. It's not elevating those pathological or what we would deem pathological character traits in people. It's actually elevating a different set. And it seems to be, and again, I'm sure there's many interesting reasons for this, but it seems to be elevating things like honesty, things like integrity, things like responsibility, things like proof of work, things like genuine value creation. This set of rules and systems and the degree to which people, or the manner in which people have to engage in it, is elevating those. And that's, I mean, I obviously think it's better, because what kind of a culture or society would you have when the incentives actually elevate what we would probably all agree to be good things, you know, honesty, integrity, morality, these sorts of things. And a lot of conversations need to be had about what all those things mean, because they've kind of been on the shelf for so long. And that, I find all that very interesting. But suffice it to say that, again, I think the emergence of Bitcoin and the culture forming around it, or not even the culture, like what it's forcing, the behavior changes that it's incentivizing and elevating, are those things that we would deem to be good. And so that's not only a reflection of the good of the thing itself from which those things are being instigated or emanating, i.e. Bitcoin, you know, so like a moral assessment of Bitcoin, let's say. But of course, I think that's more conducive to a society that properly that rewards the proper things and disincentivizes or does not reward the improper things, which, as you were saying, in the fiat system are tremendously elevated and rewarded and incentivized. So I mean, this is why there's such a tension between the two, because they're basically antithetical to one another, even though you'll get instances of the opposite in both, of course, because you know, they're not all encompassing. But that's how I see things playing out. And I mean, it's one of the reasons why I'm so excited for and optimistic about what Bitcoin represents, because wouldn't you love it if you increasingly lived or engaged in a society like that? And again, you, as you said, with the, you know, feeling alienated with a worldview, and then meeting those people online, on the internet, at conferences that share that, and you really get to feel what it's like. And it's a complete departure from what's on offer in the manipulated, illegitimate, you know, immoral, et cetera system. And that's the thing that I think the more that is showcased, that will draw people in, because there's just something attractive about those things, you know, goodness, broadly speaking, that has a magnetic sort of effect, I think. So, you know, our responsibility, if there is one, is just to be representatives of that in some way, and not, you know, not exclusively for that reason, because we stand to benefit ourselves by doing that. But we should try to represent the good that this thing rewards us for. Basically, it's not we're not sacrificing anything to do it.
And it's why it's one of the reasons where it's right in line with something I try to reiterate. I should probably talk about more, but that the best thing you can do for Bitcoin adoption, particularly in your like local social circles, is have conviction. Is conviction and stability, particularly as the world gets more and more volatile and chaotic. Because essentially what you're doing is you're manifesting strength. And from a social context, there are very few things that people gravitate more toward than strength, than conviction. You know, everybody feels lost, you know, again, and if you can know and be certain of like one thing, like if you can be a rock for the people around you, that will do more for them opening their eyes to why you might have that, you might feel
Where'd
like
you get the strength?
Can be that, like, where the hell did that come from? And that lends itself to not making stupid bets, not leveraging yourself, like building a strong foundation, figuring out how to get your stake not having to go to the grocery store, you know, like, to like create some of your own energy. And like those are probably my next two things to tackle, right? Is make sure I got my steak thing sorted out, steak and eggs, and how to produce a little bit of energy myself. Because I know the grid goes down, I'm screwed right now.
Yeah.
And I don't want that. Like I want that. I want greater stability. I don't want to have to think about the housing market. I want to protect, I want to buffer mine and my family's lives from those problems. And when the consequences of that dependence shows up for other people, I will happily and thoroughly explain, the alternative or the exit door out, the way to get the hell out of there.
Yeah, or just refer them to your enormous body of work.
You guys should live in the Bitcoin Audible.
How are you on time? Are you good for a little while longer? You got to bounce?
Yeah, I'm good. What time is it? 3:30. Yeah, we can go for a little bit longer. Yeah.
All right. Well, just two more things, and we'll see how long they take. So they're not necessarily small, but just to put a bow on this particular conversation. What do you think what's happening macro right now? And from my perspective, I'm fascinated by it and I enjoy talking about it, but its relevance is ever diminishing for me because, I live increasingly in a Bitcoin world and I want that. And, the legacy world becomes less and less relevant. But in any case, with everything that's going on now, how do you see this influencing Bitcoin related stuff? I mean, you mentioned that, some of the banks that service Bitcoin and crypto companies in the space are probably going to be having a hard time. There seems to be a coordinated, or there's a lot of negative press, news, and policy.
Very convenient.
Right. Directed against Bitcoin and crypto right now.
Shut the door really quick, but I can still hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, in light of recent events and, not so recent events, what you think about the outlook for the next, I don't know, year, 2 years, 3 years in Bitcoin land.
I'll start with, I never let myself believe that there is not a time that really bad news couldn't drop and Bitcoin could fall 40, 50%, 60%, in a very short order. That is always on the table. And I think as the traditional system, so to speak, the institutions the banking system and the political system are currently reliant on, as they become more fragile and more leveraged, and the cracks begin to show more and more, they're going to get way more volatile. The laws themselves are going to get more volatile. The credit markets, the treasury markets are going to get more volatile. Like right now, oh God, the US Treasury markets are crazy. And as that comes about, there are going to be attempts to, exert control over the treasury markets, and you'll get wild swings. There will be attempts to exert control over supply chains, and there will be, both cold and hot wars. There are going to be attempts to re-exert control over capital, and there will be bombs lobbed at Bitcoin. And so I expect I expect the entire world, Bitcoin included, to be very volatile for the next foreseeable future. But that is where Bitcoin, I think, will thrive. Bitcoin is an anti-fragile thing. The more stressors there are, the more it will respond and essentially create more and more avenues around it, like Twitter censorship and Nostr, I feel like are a great microcosm of exactly that sort of thing. And as that happens, Bitcoin is going to be more and more stable from the context of the people around it, of its economy, that another 40% drop can happen. And, we've had a pretty steep climb, drop, and climb over the last, like, what, 3 weeks?
Mm.
Who is really bothered? But, how was, the stock market goes down 10% at any time, and people are freaking out. They're bleeding from the, they just screaming bloody murder. It's panic, bail us out, like all this stuff. That's like a Wednesday for
What is
us
this?
and
A dip
our
for ants?
economy. It's like, what is this? Wait, grow up, guys. You guys suck. And in that same vein, I think, or in kind of a similar line of thinking, is the Bitcoin is also becoming more and more global. I think what the US does is going to be increasingly less and less macro relevant, in the sense that, like, yeah, it'll short term mess with the price, but the boots on the ground in Nigeria aren't really going to be all that concerned, because they're competing with a currency that's losing 90% of its value. Like, it is a 40% dip is still a safe haven for a lot of people in this kind of crazy world we found ourselves in. And that's increasingly going to be more and more true. And the more and more people that can stomach a 30% decline to save themselves from an 80% decline in fiat, the less likely that 30% decline comes when the US or the UK or the Eurozone make any declaration or put a tax on mining, or, whatever bullshit they want to think up to try to re-exert their control over the financial system, and more specifically over capital. And lightning is a working global instant payment network. Like,
boom,
throw everything out the window. That is exactly what it is. And it is growing. It has done nothing but grow, and it is continuing to grow. And holy shit, it works. And that is increasingly going to matter a lot. And I think we will cascade upward in pricing things in sats. Like, the lower the value it is right now, the more you can actually just kind of operate in sats. Like, Nostr and kind of thing is a great example, is that, like, I'm definitely going to tip 21 sats every single time. If that doubles in value or if it cuts in half, nobody really cares. Right. Yeah. Like, it's just like 21 sats. And the same thing goes up. You start pricing things 1,000 sats, 5,000 sats. And there is this micro economy building up, and we're going to go from the ground up of creating a unit of account, because we have the medium of exchange now. And as alternative markets, the eBay of this environment pop up, and we start to expand, and the social networks expand, and the communication networks and the economic networks, like, everything is just going to start to build out, and it's going to grow on top of each other. And every increase in one area is going to result in a benefit to another area. And it's, at some point, Bitcoin is not going to care a whole lot. And there will be enough of an economy that actually has some semblance of Bitcoin-based pricing, because so much of the world can't do it in fiat anymore, that even a swing in the US dollar price or the euro price or whatever won't matter as much for economic activity. And maybe it's 1% more today, or 1% less, actually, I guess is the context. 1% less or 0.5% less, but it's going to be a little bit less again and again and again. And eventually, I mean, like, think about how unbelievably powerful it is. Like, I was on with Walker and Carla the other day, and we were chatting with Sessions. And they started, like, the tip chain or whatever, where they, like, got a waitress or waiter or whatever to download Wallet of Satoshi or something, and then they post it on Nostr, and they get zapped and stuff. It's like, and these people are having, like, hundreds of payments come in, and it's like, you have no idea, like, what country those payments are coming from is totally irrelevant. totally irrelevant. And they're just posting a QR code. Like, for serving a Bitcoiner food, they are getting tips from an entire global Bitcoiner community to the amount of a penny from Vietnam, from El Salvador, from anywhere. That's going to be a crazy thing. Like, that shit is going to be hard to stop. And then like automatic splits, like the lightning prisms things. Have you read that with Gigi? Yeah. And just like how you can program this, the fact that we have fully non-custodial financial services built on this. We're talking about non-KYC estate planning, and like key recovery and all of this stuff, that we have discovery liquidity pricing markets that are non-custodial and private. We've got eCash now. Like, this is all of the things that we've been talking about for so long born. Like, they're here. They're all still infants, but it's here, I am not worried about Bitcoin. Like, price is going to be crazy for a while, like, I'm not relying on it being any one particular thing. And I have a little bit of a fiat loan that I was betting on that cycle coming back around, that Powell would actually get aggressive again and start money printing, and we be back in QE5 or whatever it is. And I might still be wrong. I've only got like 2 years left on that bet before, like, I'm gonna be forced to make a decision or shift something around, and maybe it doesn't happen in 2 years, and I'll kick myself really, really hard for losing a little bit of, having to sell a little bit of Bitcoin that I thought I was going to avoid. But whatever, that'll be me paying for a stupid mistake and, a little bit of leverage that I never should have done. But
it's hard to interface with fiat world with any degree of confidence.
It's so hard. It is, man. How the hell you gamble on that, right?
Yeah.
But Bitcoin
you
has a bright future, though, in my opinion.
Totally. There's so many mind-blowing things about Bitcoin and Lightning and how everything's going to change. But, when as you were speaking, like, the image that always comes to mind is, like, you take national currencies and you take banking systems and you take computer and video gaming. You take all that stuff where there's some form of value exchange, but they're all siloed. You have these big steel silos over all of them. And in order for them to interoperate, there's a ton of friction, there's a ton of cost, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And this just goes like when the Starlink rockets are landing, the reverse of that for all those silos. Like, they're just smoothly going up.
Yeah.
And then all that friction is gone. And now perfect interoperability between all those things. So if you are a crazy gamer and you used to make Blizzard tokens, well, now you make Bitcoin, and now you do that as a living. And now you can go take that Bitcoin and you go to the farmer's market, and you buy high quality beef and raw milk or whatever the fuck you're into with the money that you made in the game. Now all economic activity becomes intertwined on a base layer that everyone can trust, and that is basically ironclad. Like, there is really no projecting the kind of impacts and changes that's going to foster. I mean, we can think out a couple of years perhaps, but it's
hard to overestimate.
Yeah.
It's really hard to overestimate.
Yeah. I think it's basically impossible, but it's super exciting.
Yeah.
I wanted to dig into another discussion about changes or upgrades to Bitcoin and that whole thing, but that's probably a fairly broad discussion. So why don't we do this? I'll let you go now. We'll put a pin in it, and offline afterwards, we'll nail down another time in the upcoming, week or two or something like that, whenever you're free. And sure, we'll dig into that, because I think it's a long conversation, but an important one. I'd love to get your thoughts on a lot of that stuff. So we'll give it the treatment it deserves, not the last 10 minutes of this one.
100%. I'm down. Yeah.
All right. Well, always a pleasure. I can't believe it's been so long, but
dude, it has been. For those of you, how have you been? We didn't really. I didn't get to ask you any questions.
I've been great, man. I'm I'm in a tropical environment. That's as much as I currently disclose, but I really like it. And, you know, beach and my girl and Bitcoin stuff, and pretty much happy as a pig in shit. So
Hell yeah.
Can't complain. Don't have to interface with clown world too much. And that's definitely a positive. But
Nice.
Anywhere you want to direct people or anything like that before we shut it down? I mean, for those that don't know,
Bitcoin Audible, my memes on YouTube, whatever. That stuff. You know, the usual.
So humble. All right, man. Well, you got something?
Oh, I finally settled on my editing stack. So the last like 4 memes I've done, I'm not sure if you've seen them. I'm sure you saw like the Matrix one or whatever. That one did really well.
Definitely saw the Matrix. I think I saw the most recent one, but I think
the free guy one.
Yes, like, yeah, I saw that.
That was actually supposed to be like 2.5 minutes, but like that 130-second clip took me so fucking long. And I was like, I gotta let this one go, man. But I have finally gotten the whole, kind of part of the purpose. I mean, obviously it's just fun to make memes, but part of the purpose of it was I was trying to figure out my software stack because I'd just done Final Cut forever. And I wanted to see if it really kind of made sense anymore. So basically every one of those projects took me like 6 months each, because I had an entirely different editing stack. So I was learning an entirely new piece of software every single time, like After Effects and Premiere like stack, which I had never used After Effects really. Motion, the animation version of that to integrate with Final Cut, blah, blah, blah. But I'm finally settled on DaVinci Studio, the pro version, like with Fusion, and it's pretty amazing. I love like the node setup. Like, so I'm really happy for it. Happy about it, because it just means that I think I'm actually going to be able to start turning out video. So
nice.
I'm hoping it will make a pretty big shift in the content I'm able to produce, because I have a software stack to work off of. It just took 2.5 years to get
what's the motivation? Just kind of your contribution to the meme wars, or, you know, some sort of creative expression? You know,
I did film in college. I just want to do film again. Like
I don't think I knew that.
My wife and I started a production company. And
recently?
like kind of, well, it owns Bitcoin Audible. Like, so
I got you.
2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. Bitcoin Audible is just like the project of 111 Productions. Yeah, I've just wanted to get back into film. Like I kind of went through this period where I started doing tech. And because like most part of the reason I loved film, like my honors thesis was about like the kind of the technology that changed how we filmed, like the Steadicam and like Skycam, like all of these different like technologies that allowed us to tell stories differently. And so like that was like one of my things is like I love the gadgets and the technical aspect of trying to tell a story with a piece of equipment. But I kind of had this thing where like I had to come to terms with like not thinking of myself as a filmmaker anymore, because I'd just gone fully tech, and, you know, networking and like all that stuff. And then not on purpose, really, I started a podcast. And then at some point realized that I was back to just being like a media producer. Like I'm Bitcoin is tech, but like I'm in media, you know?
Right.
And then I was like, well, shit, I can make films again. And now I actually have the capital, and I have like a community. I have people who want to invest and stuff. It's like, oh shit, let's make movies, you know, like let's make real projects. And
yeah,
so I've just been slowly building that foundation.
Nice. You know, that
holy crap, that was a long explanation.
No, that was great. No, I don't even think I knew that. So that's awesome. But last point for me is that's another one of the things we didn't touch on it, but that I'm so, because as this parallel system grows, more people come into it with a variety of different interests, talents, skills, all that kind of stuff. You get various forms of expression, music, video, writing, all this kind of stuff. And that just like the blob just grows and grows and grows. And I'm super excited to see when more people with more talents and skills and more capital, and therefore freedom to express themselves, let's say, and start doing more and more projects, right? More films, more novels, more like Fractal Encrypted, the Time Chain Codex, I don't know, late last year. I don't know if you read it. It's fucking awesome. You know?
No, so he sent it to me. Like we had a DM back and forth. I was like, oh man, that's so fucking cool.
I love that shit. And you know, more stuff like that, you know? So it's not, not just another Bitcoin documentary, as much as they're great, and I suspect there will be more, and I'm glad for that. But just juicing more creativity out of the freedom and the inspiration that being around this stuff inspires and permits. And I just can't wait to see people get their, like, you get in and you figure your life out and you get more security. And as Bitcoin, price goes up, or you stack more sats, or you become more in control of your life, like you were alluding to earlier, then you feel more freedom to pursue those sorts of things. And I feel like there's just going to be so much good stuff that's imbued and inspired by, many of the principles we were discussing, and many of the principles that you find in Bitcoin. And I can't wait to see all the creations. So I fully endorse your getting back into filmmaking and such.
Fingers crossed. The thing I'm really excited about right now I've got my stack together, and I'm looking at across the room right now, pieces of a fresh Linux machine, a fresh computer that will be a major editing machine. I got a project that I'm really excited about. Not really sharing details or anything, but
Son of a bitch.
I think
leave us hanging.
Need to tell more stories.
I agree.
And that I think story is how we make people understand. It's how we relate to everything in life, in our world. And I think if you tell the human story of Bitcoin, you will wake a lot of people up. And I'm hoping to be able to contribute to that meaningfully. So
awesome. Well, I can't wait to hear more when you have more to share, or when it comes to fruition. So I look forward to it. Well, man, I'll let you go. I appreciate the time, and I'll hit you up, and we'll figure out another time to do this soon, because I want to pick your brain on some more stuff.
Sounds good, man. I'm around.
All right, brother.
Good talking
to you,
dude.
You too, brother.
Later,
See
man.
ya.